How's it going, guys? I'm Theo Joe, and as you probably know, the upcoming next generation of consoles will be out in holiday 2020, namely that's going to be the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X. So what we're going to do is talk about today the new features in both of these consoles, kind of compare the two, talk about the specs, and some new features in each of them over previous generations. So first what we can do is go over features that both of the consoles have, and then we can go over features that each individual one has over their previous generations. Because as you probably expect, a lot of the overall features are pretty similar, they just are a little bit different in terms of the specs. So let's go over what both of these have. So first of all, one thing both the PS5 and the Xbox Series X, which I'll just call Xbox from now on, what they both have is the ability to do 4K gaming and 8K gaming. Now, from what I understand, basically it's going to mostly target 4K, but have the ability to get up to 8K in some situations, but I don't think most games are going to be targeting that. So on the product pages, this is being called like up to 8K and 8K ready, but I think mostly it's going to be 4K. Now for processors, interestingly, both consoles actually have similar CPUs, and these are both custom 8-core Ryzen 2 CPUs made by AMD. So I think they're custom made for each console. So overall, they're both 8-core Ryzen 2 CPUs, but they're slightly different, and then the PS5 is running at 3.5 gigahertz, and the Xbox is running at 3.8 gigahertz. Next up, talking about the GPU and compute units, which are CUs for short, and the basic equivalent of these you could consider with CPUs are kind of like a compute unit is like a group of cores. They kind of share a job. You don't really have to know exactly what they are, but in any case, the PS5, in terms of graphics power, is going to have 10.28 teraflops with 36 compute units at 2.23 gigahertz, whereas the Xbox is going to have 12 teraflops with 52 compute units at 1.825 gigahertz. So in terms of the raw number, it's looking like the Xbox is going to have a little bit more graphics power than the PS5. And the PS5 looks like it has fewer compute units for the GPU, but they run at a faster clock than the Xbox, which has more at a slower clock. And I will point out, the Xbox Series X is extremely powerful, so it basically has twice the power of the Xbox One X, and apparently 8 times the power of the original Xbox One. Next, apparently both consoles have the same amount of memory, so they both have 16 gigabytes of GDDR6 memory, but they have slightly different memory bandwidths. So the PS5 has 448 gigabytes per second, whereas the Xbox has 336 gigabytes per second. Another big feature in both of these consoles is they each have custom SSD, solid-state drives, compared to just regular hard drives that previous generations have had. And the PS5 has an 825 gigabyte custom SSD, and the Xbox is going to have a 1 terabyte custom SSD. So the PS5, significantly less space, but apparently it is going to be a little bit faster than the Xbox because I think it's more integrated into the system, whereas the Xbox, from what I understand, is more like a traditional type SSD, and both will allow having expandable SSD storage. So the PS5 will be able to take any NVMe SSD that can basically handle the speeds, whereas the Xbox will have proprietary expansion cards that will basically be just SSDs made by Seagate, I believe. And with Xbox, they're saying because it's going to be Xbox branded cards expansion, it basically these cards you slide in for the Xbox will be the exact same storage performance as what's built into the Xbox, whereas that might not be the case with the PS5, because from what I understand, the PS5's custom SSD built onto the system is so much better than really any consumer SSDs that you could buy and insert. So that's all good, but if you want to expand it, it might not be able to get the same performance. So that's going to raise some questions about if you want to install a bunch of games on the expandable storage, would you rather put your most heavily intensive games on the custom SSD internal because it'll run better than even a expandable SSD. And when I'm talking about these types of expandable SSDs, I'm not talking about external like USB storage. Both consoles will also support external USB storage of some kind, but that's not going to be even nearly as fast as the expandable SSD storage that I was just talking about. So apparently for both PS5 and Xbox Series X, if you have external USB storage, you'll be able to install games onto it and run games off it, but apparently it'll only be like older generation. So if you want to run a PS5 game and install it on a SSD, it has to be either internal or expandable storage, not external storage, and the same goes for Xbox Series X in terms of current generation or previous generation. So if you want to run a new Xbox Series X game, it has to be on the internal or expandable card slot, not some random external USB drive. All right, now next up, another important spec is I/O throughput. From what I understand, that's basically how much data you can get from the SSD onto the screen, basically. And with the PS5, that's going to be 5.5 gigabytes per second raw, and if it's compressed data, it can be 8 to 9 gigabytes per second. And with Xbox, it's quite a bit slower in this case, actually, with 2.4 gigabytes per second raw, 4.8 gigabytes per second compressed. But apparently the Xbox does have like a lot of really good low-level optimizations, so it might not be fair to just compare the raw numbers. And obviously with all of these specs, it does seem like both consoles have slight advantages in one way or another between each other. So really we're gonna have to wait for real world results to see how each one stacks up against each other. So if it's maybe a console exclusive for the PS5, that might run better than games that are made for both Xbox and PS5, in which case the Xbox having more raw power might do better for those types of games. So we'll have to really see how this means practically in real terms. And then the next feature that both of these consoles will have are 4K Blu-ray drives. So you'll be able to watch 4K Blu-ray, unlike the current PS4 Pro, which only does regular Blu-ray, whereas the Xbox One S and the Xbox One X both do support 4K Blu-ray already. So now all consoles will be consistent in that regard. All right, so now let's talk about the PS5 and some features specifically just with that. So first we can talk about backwards compatibility. Apparently the PS5 will have backwards compatibility with many PS4 games. Not every single one though. Basically Sony said an overwhelming majority of PS4 games will be supported on the PS5, and I believe that means pretty much all the extremely popular ones will be supported on PS5. One figure I saw said that they're going to start with the 100 most popular games, make them compatible, and then move on. So yes, most games should be compatible, but it might not be every single one if you really like an obscure game. Now, we already mentioned the SSD, but while an SSD might be anywhere from like 5 to 10 times faster than a hard drive, PlayStation 5, with this whole optimizations they're going for and the custom-made SSD, are trying to get the actual real performance to be 100 times faster than using a hard drive in previous generations. So the actual load speeds they're going for are several times faster than just what the difference between an SSD and a hard drive might suggest. So I believe what they're going for is basically no load times at all, which would be pretty awesome. Next up, another big feature Sony is pushing for the PS5 is 3D audio or spatial audio using their Tempest engine. So this will be supported in both standard headphones, but also probably surround sound systems, where basically the developer can program not just what sounds are supposed to be coming out of the speaker, but also program in the actual location of where a sound is supposed to be coming from spatially. So it's really similar to Dolby Atmos in this respect, but this is basically the PS5 proprietary version. They didn't want to use Dolby Atmos, they wanted to go with their own system. So this is basically just going to mean in practical terms that you'll probably have a lot more realistic audio, and you'll be able to probably tell where audio is coming from just the way that the audio is rendered. People are calling it kind of ray tracing for audio, but basically it's just gonna make it much more realistic to be able to tell where sounds are coming from, even with just two speakers on your head. Next up, we can talk about the new controllers, which Sony did actually announce in full recently. So these are gonna be called the DualSense 5 controllers. And one big feature is they're gonna have haptic feedback. So you know, previous generations, rumble was the main thing, where if the developer wants to add some tactile feedback, they basically just have the whole controller rumble. Whereas with this, they'll be able to really fine tune it. So have different types of feelings on the triggers, the whole controller, depending on what type of movement the character or whatever is doing. So they might be able to program in haptic feedback that feels kind of like some is grinding, maybe some clicking type haptic feedbacks. I don't know, maybe some smooth, slow rolling haptic feedbacks, just pretty much any type, not just a pure rumble. Another cool feature is adaptive triggers. So they'll apparently be able to adjust the actual resistance on the triggers. So that'll be cool with different types of weapons. Maybe with a bow, it'll be more resistive or whatever, just add some realism. Some other minor features is they're replacing the name of the share button to be the create button. So they're probably just trying to expand the use of that button to not just be, oh, share it to Facebook or whatever. You can actually use it to like make videos, which you can already do, but maybe make it more clear. They're also adding USB USB-C as the type of plug, which is awesome for charging. And then also there's a microphone added to the controller. So this might not be good as a headset, obviously, but now that all controllers will have a microphone built in, that's pretty cool. Another graphics feature that's going to be added on the PS5 is ray tracing. So a lot of GPUs now have that these days, the new ones at least. So that's awesome that these new generations will support it. And finally, for PS5, quiet fan speeds is something that Sony's apparently focusing on. I believe I've heard that they're trying to make it so the consumption of the PS5 power-wise will be pretty consistent, so it's not like they're going to be random spikes in power and have to speed up the fans, and it'll be loud sometimes, quiet other times. It should be pretty consistent and just much quieter in general. All right, so let's move on and talk about Xbox Series X features, and we could first talk about that weird naming system. Apparently, what Microsoft is doing is basically saying this latest generation of Xbox consoles will just be called Xbox, and I believe they'll have several in this generation, and this first one is just going to be called the Xbox Series X. So to me, it kind of seems like Microsoft is going for more like a PC type generation, where every game designed for the Xbox generation will be able to be played on any of the Xboxes within that generation. But obviously, if you fork out more money for the more expensive, higher power one or the more recent one, then you'll have a better, more smooth performance experience. This also suggests to me that we're not going to have to wait so long between generations for Xbox like we did between like Xbox 360 and Xbox One. It'll be more like how they were doing the Xbox One, then the Xbox One S, then the X, and now the new generation, which is just Xbox. So I do think that's pretty good in general, and it makes more sense with modern times, with technology moving so much faster. Now, in terms of compatibility, Microsoft is apparently really going in on this, and they're saying that not just Xbox One games will be backwards compatible, but even 360 and even original Xbox games will be playable on this new Xbox. So that is awesome. Definitely a leg up over PS5, which is only going to have limited backwards compatibility. Next up, in terms of the controller, this new Xbox controller is actually pretty similar to the previous one, and they're actually going to be intercompatible. So you'll be able to use the new Xbox controller on an Xbox One generation and vice versa. But there are going to be some additional changes with the new one. So there's going to be a share button, which I guess is going to be the same as the PS5's create button. Also, it's going to support USB-C charging, no surprise there. And also it'll have improved wireless latency. Again, just these performance increases are not really any surprise. For graphics, like the PS5, Xbox Series X will also have ray tracing, which is awesome. Again, we'll probably want that in this new generation because that's apparently going to be a big thing for graphics going forward, I think. And finally, another cool graphics feature with the Xbox will be called HDR reconstruction. So they'll be able to basically upscale games that weren't originally HDR and make them HDR with, if your TV supports it, obviously. So that'll be cool for just making games look better in general. So that's what we know so far. Obviously, we don't know everything about these consoles yet. They're not out, but at least now we have some good ideas about how these are going to be different from the previous generations. Speaking of new technology and stuff, if you guys want to keep watching, the next video I'd recommend is talking about the new band for Wi-Fi that's going to be coming up, 6 gigahertz. So, you know, there's 2.4, 5 gigahertz. We're now going to be getting probably soon 6 gigahertz Wi-Fi. So I made a video talking about that if you just want to click on that. So thanks so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.